Hi again, everybody, and welcome back to Expressive Photography. Now, today's question by Rob Weir: do certain visual designs lend themselves to specific crop aspect ratios? I think the very simple question, or the very simple answer to that, is yes. I think that, you know, in this channel I've done an awful lot of like compositional consequences type videos where I'm looking at everything that we do, from how we process the temperature, the tints, the amount of contrast, has a massive consequence. It's not about right or wrong, it's about the consequence. And aspect ratios absolutely change the feel of an image. Now, whether certain types of content lend themselves to specific aspect ratios or not is probably a little bit more debatable. Still there. But what I thought I'd do is, let's have a look at the screen here. This is part of a video, a print series that I'm making called Resurrection. And if we look at these two examples, first of all, so this is actually, the image on the right is the print, but the image on the left is the thumbnail for the gallery. And you can see how very differently the two of them feel. Now, I love squares. You know I love squares. I think you can put anything into a square and it's going to feel harmonious. But the image on the right feels more elevated. It's as simple as that, really, that if we use vertical aspect ratios, then they're going to emphasize the height. The more narrow that aspect ratio, so if this is 4:5, if this was a 3:2 vertical, which I never do, it's going to feel even taller. And think about a 16:9 or a vertical pano, things like that. They just feel super tall. Check out Julia Anna Gospodaru's print series, and she has some very, very narrow vertical panoramic images of skyscrapers, I believe from New York, and you'll see they just feel hugely tall. So 4:5 square, they're my normal aspect ratios, so they feel a little bit elevated or a little bit more horizontal, but they're not as exaggerated as they would be if they were narrower. Now, if we stick with this concept that if we look at the same scene taken in two different ways, the image on the left is a 3:2. I don't post many 3:2 images, but that's one of them that works. And the image on the right is obviously the same scene, but as a 4:5 vertical. Now, again, the image on the right, because we have this strong diagonal coming in from the left-hand side and another one coming down from that top right-hand side, we've got different things in the frame pointing in, and therefore that, I think, works because they're like arrows. I mean, if you've got strong lines in a frame, each of them has an arrowhead on the end of it, and it's either pointing out of the frame or into the frame, or vertically or horizontally. These arrowheads are directional indicators. That's where the eyes want to follow. We follow lines. So if you think about that, if there are things in the frame that are pointing, or there's lines giving directionality, then that might give you an indication as to the type of aspect ratio that's going to work better. I couldn't crush either of these frames into a square, as an example. So if we just think about each, I mean, for me, there's only like 3 or 4 different aspect ratios I use. Now, if I stick in my print gallery here, here's another example where I have 3 different images that have 2 different aspect ratios. There's 2 4:5 verticals and 1 square. Now, the content in each of those, I believe, works in that aspect ratio. But so much of this is going to boil down to personal preference. I think it's important that you understand the implication of aspect ratios on your photographs, because the more narrow or the more extreme the relationship between the horizontal and the vertical. So if you have panoramic images, horizontal panels emphasize expansiveness. Vertical panels we've discussed in terms of Juliana Gospodaro's work, they emphasize height. 4:5s, horizontally or vertically, are emphasizing slightly width or slightly height. And, it's the classic Hans Strand quote, why do you shoot 4:5? Because they look more expensive. And I was joking with Adam Gibbs on his channel a couple of days ago about this very thing, is that 4:5, it just looks classy. This is a print I made just a couple of days ago. And by putting it into a 4:5 aspect ratio, we're emphasizing somewhat the height, we're confining the sides, and we're allowing the content to sit very harmoniously within the frame. If we look at the previous shot, the square helps to organize the chaos in this. There's an awful lot of random splashing going on, but it feels like it sits in the frame nicely. And finally, this zigzag. Now, here's a very subconscious thing you'll notice here. This distance at the bottom right-hand side here, so that bit of reddish foreground rock, is exactly the same as this black section up there. And what that's doing is creating symmetry, that feeling of balance between the two areas. So if this was a higher aspect ratio, we would have to rebalance that, so that, because there's an impact, there's a consequence, as always, of everything we do. Now, I tend to do a lot of this stuff just subconsciously. I'm not really thinking about balance. I'm not thinking about harmony. That's just years and years and years of doing this. I think I've found my flow, and I trust my gut, so I just tend to go with things. I think that's a really valid point, and it's worth just mentioning again. When I'm in my most creative, I'm being spontaneous. I'm not following rules. I'm not following societal standards. I'm experimenting. I'm exploring. I'm pushing boundaries. I'm teasing my imagination. I'm getting excited. And aspect ratios are part of that exploration. The only way you're going to find your way is to explore lots of different aspect ratios. So I think the best thing you can do is understand what is your photograph about, which bit of the frame is telling the story best. I think I mentioned on the last question that I answered for Chris, don't make your viewers guess what you're trying to say. Tell them. So aspect ratios are part of that articulation. They allow us to say, this is what this photograph is about. These are the bits that you need to be focused on. Nothing else outside of this frame matters, so don't think about it. If you have viewers wondering, well, it looks like it might be really interesting. I wish he'd shown us more of the left. Then you're in a bit of bother. It's like writing a book and then, leaving the last 20 pages blank, and everyone wants to know how it's going to finish. That's what compositions are like. You don't want people guessing what's on the outside of this. There's something outside of this frame that I wish I could see. Aspect ratios help to confine and compress and control and articulate and distill what we're trying to say. Whether certain aspect ratios fit certain types of content, probably not. I don't think that certain styles of photography particularly warrant one aspect ratio or another. I think you could argue any one of those things. One thing you're not going to get on this channel, and I think I've mentioned it before, is let's not try to create black and white, do this, do that, this needs to be in that. Anything can do anything. We can make anything work. I'm pretty certain of that. We can make anything work. It's just the case of believing that anything can work. We don't want to be creating these boundaries of if I'm shooting in a forest, I have to shoot 4x5, or if I'm shooting at the beach, it has to be a 3:2 horizontal, or all of that type of thing. Get all that thinking out of your mind. I'm going to have a sip of my coffee to soothe my poor throat. But yeah, thanks for watching again. I hope this has kind of answered your question. I could just talk forever about landscape photography, so hopefully you're getting some value out of this. Any comments, just stick them down below and I'll get back to you. I really appreciate all your engagement, and thank you very much, as always, for supporting our channel. Appreciate it. Bye for now.